The Last Seamstress of Warsaw.
Chapter 1. Threadbare.
Rivka pressed her cheek to the cracked window, watching trucks rumble into Nolowki Street. It was April 1941, yet the sky was the color of cinders, ashes of her former life. At 24, she had already lost everything. The market stall, her brother's laughter, the smell of starched collars. Now, like every Jew in Warsaw, she was being herded into the ghetto. They said it was temporary, that the Germans would sort them, then let the rest live. But Rivka knew better. She pulled her shawl close, eyes following chalk lines drawn on walls, ghostly borders of another prison. The air pressed heavy, thick with fear and rumor. A soldier barked orders. Mothers clutched their infants. Frail old men stared, mute. Rivka's eyes found her neighbor Beata, who gave a small nod, an unspoken truth between them. They were not safe. Inside the ghetto, the air changed. Straw lay in wet streets, shutters closed tight, children's cries slicing through the din. The buildings seemed to lean inward, ashamed. Rivka's footsteps echoed her hollow heartbeat. She held a small quilt stitched from scraps of her family's clothing, each piece a memory. In their assigned quarters, hundreds were packed into shabby rooms. No privacy, no sanitation. She laid her quilt on the floor, smoothing the cracked fabric, finding a breath of safety in its weight. Then came the knock, her next assignment, the textile workshop. The workshop smelled of oil, fabric, and cold authority. Neat piles of German uniforms waited to be altered. A foreman barked her station, and she sat at the machine. The click-clack of needles beat like a heartbeat gone wrong. Her hands were steady. She was a seamstress, but this was not silk and lace. She hemmed trousers, patched tunics, stitched insignias. Each stitch for the enemy felt like betrayal, yet she worked in silence. At night by candlelight, she cradled her quilt and whispered into its seams. She began to sew tiny symbols into German uniforms, stars, initials, dates, small, hidden, and dangerous. Each stitch was a prayer sewn to outlast her. She remembered Malka, who taught her to count stitches, Isaac, teasing her about crooked seams, her mother's lullabies. Their voices lived in her hands. One afternoon, she clipped the lining of a jacket and saw what she'd sewn, a perfect six-pointed star in red silk, invisible unless turned inside out. Her breath caught. A man stepped beside her, Ezra, his voice low in Yiddish and Polish. "You," he murmured, "you embedded the star." His eyes held both pain and resolve. He spoke of resistance, of messages carried in thread. "Can you help us speak through stitches?" Fear gripped her, but beneath it, defiance burned. She touched her bundle of scraps. "I will," she whispered. That night, under a bruise-coloured sky, she sat in her narrow room with the quilt on her lap. She stared at her reflection, pale, hollow-eyed, yet burning inside. Could a stitch change anything? She pressed the needle through cloth. Outside, wind rattled shutters. A child cried. Somewhere a soldier whispered orders. In the candle's light, Rivka sewed her first coded message, a line of Polish verse, hidden in the hem of a German jacket. And in that moment, full of fear, longing, and courage, Rivka became more than a seamstress. She became a keeper of stories, a smuggler of dreams, a quiet rebellion given form. Chapter 2. A Stitch in Silence. By mid-May, Rivka's hands were calloused, her knuckles raw from soapless scrubbing and coarse wool. Each morning, she walked the narrow alley between barbed gates and bomb-cracked walls, shoulders tight beneath her patched coat. Inside her pocket rested her grandmother's brass thimble, its worn curve pressing into her palm like a quiet promise. The workshop loomed like a cold cathedral of uniforms. Women bent over Singer machines beneath flickering lamps, the air heavy with muffled weeping and the drone of metal teeth. Orders barked in German thundered overhead, but Rivka narrowed her world to thread, cloth, and silence. Only her hands spoke. She stitched initials into lapels, names of vanished friends. She hid a scrap of Beata's wedding lace inside a collar. She knotted a hem to mimic the secret hand sign her brother once used in temple. Each garment carried grief, sewn in defiance. Ezra returned, not daily, never predictably, but often enough for her to search for him in the shadows. On their fourth meeting, he left a spool of red thread on her table. Red was forbidden. She stared at it as if it might explode, then tucked it beneath her coat. That night, after curfew, she worked by candlelight. The red thread was used sparingly, a single stitch across a chest seam, a hidden loop beneath a brass button. Red meant watch the courier. Red meant danger. Red meant life, pulsing against the drabness of war. Weeks passed. Certain coats began arriving first. Officers' coats, destined for travel beyond the ghetto. Ezra must have allies in shipping. These coats carried more than warmth. One evening, he brought her a child's wool cap. "Fix it," he said, "and write her name inside." She didn't make it out. Her name was Ada. She was 9. Rivka sewed the name beneath the brim, then added a faint verse from the Psalms in Hebrew thread. By morning, the cap was gone. Ezra now treated of her for any high was interest in 9. At the end of June, a wiry boy of 14 dropped a parcel at her bench. Inside the muslin wrapping were strips of encoded cloth, messages written in ciphered thread. Rivka was no longer just memorialising, she was a link in a chain. She stitched in a new rhythm, 3 short, 2 long, a single loop. Not Morse, but close enough for those who knew. The seams of these jackets now carried directions, warnings, and the names of living children. By midsummer, her hands worked on instinct, but her heart stayed alert. Danger had a scent now: cologne, sweat, and meat stolen from rations. The new German overseer with the birthmark beneath his collar lingered too long on Ezra's movements. One sweltering afternoon, Ezra placed a folded note beneath her thimble. One word in pencil: soon. Rivka closed her eyes. Whatever came next, she would be ready.
Chapter 3. The Courier. The courier's name came on a rain-slicked morning in early July. Rivka stood at her station, fingers numb, when Ezra slipped behind her and murmured, "His name is Dawid. Trust him." She didn't turn, but her pulse leapt. The boy with the haunted eyes now had a name. That afternoon, she saw him near the front of the workshop, wiping soot from his hands, pretending to search for tools. A woman distracted the overseer, and in that brief gap, Dawid dropped a scrap beneath her bench. Folded into the hem of a false cuff was a swatch of linen, stitched with 3 crimson loops and a crosshatch, her cipher mirrored back. Message received. More soon. For the first time since the walls closed in, Rivka felt heard. Her language of thread had an answering voice. The weeks blurred into risk and rhythm. Dawid brought scraps, Ezra whispered updates, and Rivka sewed messages so small they hid beneath buttons and inside padded collars. Names of sick children, directions to sellers, warnings about informants. Ezra sometimes stayed after curfew, sweeping or fetching tools as cover. He told her of his dream to teach literature, of his mother reading until her voice failed, of losing his brother to the first sweep. Rivka's replies were sewn, collars pressed flat, seams repaired with extra care. In these times, love was not spoken, it was stitched. One night, with sirens distant, Ezra whispered, "There's talk of a fight, real resistance." "And you?" she asked. "I'll be there, if they'll have me." She didn't ask if she'd lose him too. Instead, she gave him a small handkerchief, blue thread on white linen, a poem stitched faintly at the edge. Even in the ashes, something sings. By late summer, the workshop tightened under suspicion. A German officer with pale glass eyes lingered near her station. One afternoon, he pulled a coat from her pile, fingers grazing the lining. Her breath stopped. A small decorative star, barely visible. "Pretty," he said in clipped Polish. "Your kind always fancies stars." He dropped the coat and walked away. That night, she tore through every jacket in her bundle, unstitching anything too exposed. Her fingers bled, but the next day she returned. Then David's last message arrived, a silk square wrapped around the cigarette butt, coded in yellow thread. "Prepare for silence, all threads pause, courier compromised. Wait." No one said dead. But silence here meant only one thing. Rivka wept that night for David, for the cap, for what could not be saved. She thought of stopping, sewing safe stitches, but the next morning Ezra left a spool of black thread and a note beneath her tea mug. "We continue." And so she did. At month's end, Rivka received an unusual commission, a white wool jacket for a high-ranking German commander, lined with silk, stitched with care. In the curve of its collar, she embroidered a message so faint it would need firelight to see. "No uniform can hide blood." And beneath the hem, in her smallest, most invisible stitch, she wrote the names of every courier she had known, real and lost. David's name came last. Beside it, she added her own, Rivka, a single name sewn into war. Chapter 4. Frayed Trust. Suspicion moved like smoke through the workshop. It began with a misplaced spool, red thread, left too close to a supervisor's desk. No one claimed it. The overseer, a thin man with sour breath and calloused hands, ordered tighter inspections. From that day, every bag was checked, every thread counted. Rivka slowed her stitching, pausing to listen for footsteps, glancing toward the door. Ezra warned her not to look up so much. "You'll draw attention," he murmured, but it was already too late. Halina, the new girl from Lublin, had arrived 2 weeks earlier. She sewed fast, too fast, her hands too clean, her eyes fixed on Rivka's bench. Ezra didn't trust her, neither did Rivka. Then Rivka's pouch of pre-coded patterns vanished. She searched everywhere, even beneath Halina's table. Nothing. She didn't tell Ezra. That night, Ezra came to her door with 2 potatoes and a sliver of onion. They sat against peeling plaster, wrapped in her quilt. "There's a mole," he said quietly. "One of ours is gone, burned alive. I think someone told." Rivka lowered her eyes. The new girl watches me. She's fast. Ezra nodded. We'll be careful. We're close now. To what? She asked. To making it count. Days passed. Halina hummed at her station. One morning, she asked for Rivka's scissors. Your stitches, she said, are almost like lace. Rivka forced a smile. That night, she hid her thread in a hollow beam and sewed only safe stitches. Ezra noticed. We can't pause. I'm protecting us, she said. You're protecting her, he replied. Then the raid came. 4 soldiers stormed in. 2 women were dragged away, a third shot for refusing to hand over her satchel. Halina wasn't touched. Ezra disappeared the next day. No note, no glance. 3 days later, a scrap tumbled from a tunic's lining. A curl of red thread and a fragment of linen marked with Ezra's code. Still here, watching, quiet. She pressed it to her lips. She had trusted silence, and it had nearly undone them. Now she would trust herself. The next week, a ceremonial shawl arrived. No German orders, just white wool and a note. Can you make this holy? She knew the sender. The fabric was soft, frayed at the edges, like her father's talit. She gathered her thread, her patterns, her hidden codes, and began to stitch. Not just names, but stories, prayers, maps of tunnels, a memory of David, a star for Beata, a line of Ezra's favorite verse. It would not be worn in pride. It would be carried in fire, and perhaps through thread, through quiet, through love, it would endure.
Chapter 5. Unraveled. The air in the workshop shifted overnight. No longer just fear, but a charge that prickled against skin. Rivka arrived to find her tools moved, her fabric refolded. Someone had searched. She said nothing. At midday, the door slammed open. 2 SS officers entered with the overseer and Halina, thin-lipped, hair pulled tight. Search them, the officer barked. Panic rippled. Coats were ripped open, linings torn, threads pulled loose like veins. One by one, they examined every seam. Rivka's needle slipped from her hand. They reached her station. The officer seized the ceremonial shawl, tearing it apart. Embroidery fell away, but the messages were too subtle, too buried. He didn't see them. Who made this? He demanded. I did. He stared, then dropped it to the floor. You Jews sew well, even lies. They hadn't found the truth, but someone had told them where to look. That night, Rivka walked home under a low, heavy sky, expecting boots at her back. None came. Ezra was waiting near her doorway, his jacket stained with ash. They know, she whispered. He nodded. The Mila hideout is gone. Dawid's cousin was taken. Halina's gone, escorted out. Rivka sagged. They ripped the shawl, but didn't see it. Finish it, Ezra said. It can leave with the hospital blankets Thursday. There's no one left to wear it. Then someone will carry it. That night, fire came. She woke to shouting, smoke curling through the cracks. She grabbed her quilt, her thread pouch, the shawl, and ran. The workshop burned, roof collapsing, windows glowing. The air stank of burning wool. She searched until she found Ezra, slumped behind crates, coughing, blood on his lips. They found the box, he rasped. She led them to it. Don't speak. He pressed a charred scrap into her hand. Finish it. Promise. She held him, but his eyes closed.
This time, no stitch could bring him back. The next day, Rivka sat in a bombed stairwell, the shawl on her lap, smelling of smoke. Hours remained before Thursday's shipment. She sewed through shaking hands and numb fingers, Ezra's name, a psalm, the addresses of hidden orphans, the word resist in Hebrew, English, Polish. Red thread, black thread, a pale thread that would only show in firelight. When she finished, she wrapped the shawl in coarse cloth and hid it beneath a medical blanket's lining. No label, only memory. That night, she sat by the ruins, quilt around her shoulders. Somewhere, a siren wailed. In her hands, the thread remained, and it would carry them forward, even if her hands could not.
Chapter 6. The uprising looms. Snow returned to Warsaw in early March, falling without a sound. The ghetto was not peaceful, only tense, as though the walls themselves were holding their breath. Every step echoed too loud. Every whisper could cost lives. Rivka moved carefully through the alleys, hunger carving her face into sharper lines. The workshop was gone. The others, scattered, taken, vanished. But she stayed, because the shawl had made it. A girl courier, no older than 16, brought the news. They carried it through, she said. One of the fighters wore it crossing the sewer into the Aryan side. They call it the blood cloth now. Rivka had to sit. The shawl hadn't saved Ezra, but it had survived him, and through it he endured. The ghetto was changing. Coal-scrawled posters appeared on crumbling walls. April, we rise. Weapons moved in crates marked as kindling. Gunshots echoed one night on Zamenhofer Street. 2 Germans dead, no arrests. Whispers named the resistance. Rivka didn't need to know their leaders. She had her own task. In a bakery cellar thick with dust, she pulled out her last bundle of thread, crimson, midnight blue, white, and a small piece of wool she'd been saving. Barely enough for a scarf, but enough. She began to sew. It took 2 nights. Inside, she stitched a full map of sewer routes, supply caches, and her own name, Rivka Lewin. Not hidden, not masked. Truth. A strip from Ezra's coat ran through the seam like a fingerprint. April 18th. The ghetto was quiet, but the ground felt alive. Rivka walked, with her bundle wrapped in paper and cloth. At Mila and Naleveki, a boy waited, 13, gaunt, silent. She placed it in his hand. "Give it to the fighter," she said. He nodded, then ran. The uprising began at dawn. Explosions cracked the air. Gunfire rattled the rooftops. Smoke bloomed against the sky. Men and women leaned from windows with rifles. Children hurled Molotovs from crates. Voices rose in fractured song. "We will not go like sheep." And then she saw it, the scarf. Worn by a fighter crouched behind rubble, her stitches catching sunlight before he vanished into smoke. By evening, the Germans closed in with fire and steel. Rivka hid in the bakery's cellar, quilt around her shoulders, the last strip of thread in her hand. Outside, the ghetto roared. Inside, she sewed one final word into her coat's hem. Zachor. Remember. If she didn't wake tomorrow, she hoped someone would find it. Not her name, not her stitches, just the word.
because remembering was the last rebellion. Chapter 7. The Final Thread. The ghetto burned for weeks. Flames tore across rooftops, collapsing tenements into ash. The Germans called it liquidation. The fighters called it defiance. Rivka had no name, only the sound of mortars, the smell of scorched bread and bone, the weight of silence as heavy as the smoke. On April 28th, the bakery shelter collapsed. A blast split the east wall, bricks tumbling into dust. Rivka staggered through rubble, blood down her leg, clutching the last of her thread. Her quilt was gone, her needles buried, but her hands still remembered the rhythm. She ran through broken alleys, dodging bodies and fire. Loudspeakers barked orders. Somewhere a violin played, cracked, fierce. She followed the sound. At Mila 18, fighters darted between stairwells, rifles clogged with dirt, faces streaked with soot and prayer. A boy handed her a bottle wrapped in cloth. "Molotov?" she asked. "No. Messages. In the wine bottles now." She hid it beneath her coat. Above her, the scarf, her scarf, still flew from a window, its edge burned but stitches intact. She pressed her palm to the wall and stitched her final line into the splintered wood above the door. To be forgotten is to die twice. Then she ran. She reached the sewer grate at dusk. Voices below. Coughs, footsteps, curses in Yiddish. She waited until a voice called up. "Who's there?" "Rivka Lewin. I brought the message bottle." And something else. A headlamp lit a young, hollowed face. "The seamstress?" She nodded. "We thought you were dead." She handed him the bottle and a bundle, her last creation. Ezra's maps, names of children saved, words sewn in grief and firelight. "Tell them we were here," she said. Their fingers brushed, then a mortar struck. The ground heaved, the ladder tore loose. Rivka fell back as fire bloomed, her head striking rubble. The boy vanished into the dark, her bundle in his hands. She woke to silence. Light filtered through broken beams. Her leg was shattered, her coat torn, her name stitched in the hem. But she had done it. Even if her voice never rose again, her thread would. 3 months later, a Catholic nurse at a convent outside Warsaw found a half-conscious girl in a ditch, burned, feverish, silent. She gave no name. The nurse called her Maria. Rivka never corrected her. She stayed until the war ended. Then she walked into the rebuilt Warsaw Historical Archive and donated a single embroidered cloth. "No uniform can hide blood," it read in near invisible thread. No one knew what it meant, not yet, but they hung it in the memorial hall. Years later, in a quiet museum corner, a mother pointed to the cloth. "What's that?" her daughter asked. "A message," the mother said. "From who?" The woman studied the small, stubborn stitches. "I don't know," she said, "but someone who remembered." Chapter 8. Remnants. The museum sat quietly behind ash-colored flats on Świętojerska Street. Few tourists found it. Its signs were faded, its bricks still scarred by shell fire. Inside, the air carried the weight of memory. In the textile room, a single strip of wool hung behind glass, white, frayed, faintly stained. The placard read, "Fragment of Resistance Garment, Warsaw Ghetto Uprising, 1943." Seamstress unknown, believed to contain hidden messages stitched in Hebrew, Polish, and symbolic threadwork. Rivka Lewin stood before it in silence. Her reflection stared back. Older now, silver in her hair, deeper lines around her mouth. But her hands were the same. She flexed them, remembering the needle's weight, the whisper of thread between her fingers. They didn't know her name, no record, no photo, no body, but the cloth had survived, and in its threads, everything endured. In her coat pocket, she touched the last patch of her quilt, Ezra's sleeve, Beata's apron, Dawid's cap, all stitched into one square. The rest was gone to fire and time, but this she had kept. Outside, Warsaw pulsed with traffic and spring wind. Steel rose over bones. Cafes stood where fires once raged. Children laughed where boots once marched. If you looked closely, you could still see the stitches, missing bricks in a school wall, a name scratched into a tram stop bench, a thread of red yarn tied near Mila 18. Rivka walked past the bakery ruins, now a playground, past the place where the scarf once flew, now a bookstore. The names had changed, but the memories lived on. She never told the museum who she was. What would it change? They had her thread. One evening, at dusk over the Vistula, she left a note at the museum desk. Remember the ones who stitched hope in silence, the ones who wrote poems in thread, the ones who weren't warriors but never surrendered. She signed it with one word, Zachor. Years later, in a small town outside Krakow, a young historian examined the fabric. She found maps stitched in its seams, names of orphaned children in faded blue. She wrote a paper, then a book, then spoke in New York before a hall of strangers. These weren't just garments, she said, the cloth magnified behind her. They were vessels, history not spoken, but sewn, one stitch at a time. No one knew the seamstress's name, but her voice was heard at last. The end.